It can feel unsettling from the very beginning, even if nothing obvious is wrong. The way interest is shown and then softened. The way warmth arrives and then fades without warning. You may notice how your body responds before your mind does, how something tightens when the signals don't line up. Not because you're confused about what happened, but because your system is trying to hold two different experiences at once. The closeness that felt genuine, the distance that followed without explanation. That quiet mismatch can linger longer than you expect. There's often a subtle pull that comes with mixed signals, a feeling of being invited in and held at arm's length at the same time. You may feel drawn toward the moments when they're attentive, present, emotionally open. And at the same time, you're aware of how easily that presence disappears. It can feel like you're always adjusting, always recalibrating your expectations without saying them out loud. Wanting to trust what feels real, while also noticing how often you're left in a waiting space that never quite resolves. Inside this, two feelings often coexist: appreciation and disappointment. Gratitude for what's offered, paired with a quiet longing for what isn't. You might feel comforted by their interest when it shows up, and unsettled by how inconsistent it is. Staying connected can feel easier than letting go, even when part of you senses the imbalance. Questioning whether patience will eventually be rewarded, while also noticing how much energy it takes to keep hoping. Neither feeling is wrong. They're simply there together. Over time, the focus can slowly turn inward, not in a dramatic way, more like a gentle but persistent questioning. You may start wondering if you're overthinking things, if you're being too sensitive, if you misread the closeness or expected more than what was available. These questions don't come from self-criticism as much as from a desire to make sense of the inconsistency, to reassure yourself that what you felt wasn't imagined, that the warmth mattered, even if it didn't stay. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from this kind of doubt, not loud or overwhelming, just steady. You may notice how often you replay conversations, looking for clarity that never quite settles. How you try to hold your reactions lightly, so you don't ask for too much, or seem like you're asking for clarity that hasn't been offered. That carefulness can slowly weigh on you. Even when you don't name it as effort, your body feels it. Mixed signals can create a strange emotional atmosphere, one where you're never fully relaxed, but never fully disconnected either, where hope stays alive, but never gets to rest. You may notice how your mood shifts with their attention, how a message brings relief, and silence brings unease. Not because you're dependent, but because connection naturally affects us when it feels unfinished, especially when it keeps opening and closing without warning. Sometimes there's also a quiet vigilance that forms, a watching, a listening between the lines. You may notice how tuned in you've become to subtle changes in tone or timing, how quickly you sense when something is about to pull back again. That attentiveness isn't a flaw. It's what happens when you're trying to stay oriented in a space that keeps shifting. It can feel tiring to stay this alert, even when you care deeply. There doesn't have to be a clear understanding here. No final interpretation of their behavior. The interest was real. The inconsistency was real too. You don't have to choose which one matters more. You don't have to turn this experience into insight or closure. It can remain unresolved without being invalid. You're allowed to acknowledge how destabilizing it felt to doubt yourself in a space where clarity never fully arrived. You may notice a quiet grief beneath it all, not for what ended, but for what never quite formed. For the version of the connection that felt possible, but stayed just out of reach. That grief doesn't need to be processed or resolved. It can simply be recognized without being pushed into meaning or growth. For now, there's space to rest here, with the uncertainty, with the self-doubt that wasn't a flaw, just a response, with the part of you that kept trying to understand what you were feeling. Nothing needs to be settled tonight. If it feels okay, you can stay with this recognition a little longer.